Somewhere in your kitchen right now, there is probably an avocado pit sitting in the trash, and that single pit, if you use it the right way, could turn into a tree that hands you free avocados for the next 30 to 40 years. Most people who try this fail, not because growing an avocado tree is actually hard, but because almost everyone online is teaching you the version of this that barely ever works. The toothpick in a glass of water, the seedling on the windowsill, the years of waiting for fruit that never comes. There is a completely different method that professional growers have used for decades. And once you understand it, you will never waste another pit doing it the popular but broken way again. Real quick, before we go any further, I need to stop you for 1 second. One bad planting mistake made right now, today, before you even start growing your rootstock, can cost you years of wasted time and a tree that never fruits the way you were hoping it would. Most people do not find out until it is already too late to fix. Do not let that be you. Pull out your phone right now, scan the QR code on your screen, and grab the complete guide before you plant a single pit. Let us start with the uncomfortable truth. Nobody wants to tell you when you post that cute photo of your sprouted avocado pit online. That little tree growing out of your kitchen window, the one with the toothpicks holding it above a glass of water, is probably never going to give you a single edible avocado, and if it somehow does, you could be waiting anywhere from 5 to 15 years for it to happen. This is not because you did something wrong with the watering or the sunlight. It is once because of something baked into the biology of the avocado itself. Every avocado you have ever bought at the grocery store came from a grafted tree, meaning the fruit-producing branch was surgically joined onto a separate root system. When you plant the pit from that fruit, the seed does not grow up to be a genetic copy of the parent tree. Avocados have wildly variable genetics from seed, similar to how two siblings can look completely different from each other despite sharing the same parents. Your seedling might grow into a tree that produces small, bitter, stringy fruit, or a tree that never flowers at all, or in rare lucky cases, a tree that produces something decent. But you are gambling more than a decade of your life on a coin flip. And most people who plant a pit and wait patiently eventually give up before they ever find out which way the coin landed. So here is the method that actually works, the one commercial avocado growers have relied on for generations, and it is called grafting. Instead of hoping your random seedling develops good fruit on its own, you use that seedling purely as a rootstock, meaning the root system and lower trunk, and you attach a small cutting called a scion from a tree you already know, produces excellent fruit. The scion carries the exact genetic identity of whatever variety it came from, whether that is a Hass, a Fuerte, a Bacon, or any other named variety, and once it is successfully joined to the rootstock, the tree that grows from that graft point upward will produce fruit that is identical to the parent tree the scion came from. This is the entire secret behind why nursery-bought avocado trees can fruit in 3 to 4 years, while pit-grown trees can take 5 times that long or never fruit at all. You are not waiting for random genetics to sort themselves out. You are directly transplanting proven, reliable genetics onto a young, vigorous root system. Here is how the actual process works, step by step, so you can either do this yourself or understand exactly what you are paying for if you decide to buy a grafted tree from a nursery instead. First, you grow your rootstock. This starts exactly the way most people already grow an avocado from a pit, except instead of aiming for fruit from this seedling directly, you are growing it purely for its roots and trunk. Clean the pit thoroughly, removing any lingering fruit flesh, then suspend it about 1/3 of the way submerged in a glass of water using toothpicks pressed into the sides, or simply plant it about 2 inches deep directly into a lightweight, well-draining potting mix, which many growers now consider the more reliable option since it avoids the rot that sometimes happens in standing water. Germination usually takes 2 to 6 weeks, and once your seedling reaches somewhere between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch in diameter at a point roughly 6 inches above the soil line, it is finally ready to be used as rootstock for grafting. At this stage you need your scion, which is a 4 to 6 inch cutting, taken from a healthy, actively growing branch on a mature, fruit-bearing avocado tree of a known variety. If you do not have access to a fruiting avocado tree yourself, many local nurseries, agricultural extension offices, and even generous neighbors with productive backyard trees are often willing to share a small cutting, since taking one small scion does no meaningful harm to a healthy mature tree. The scion should be roughly the same diameter as your rootstock seedling, because a mismatch in size makes it much harder for the two pieces to fuse together successfully. Listen closely for a second, because this matters more than you think. Every season you wait and just guess your way through grafting, sourcing scions, or picking a variety, you risk spending years tending a tree that was doomed from the very first cut and wasting money replacing trees that never had to die in the first place. Stop guessing right now. Grab your phone, scan the QR code on your screen, and get the complete guide before you go any further. The grafting itself typically uses what is called a cleft graft or a whip and tongue graft, both of which follow the same basic principle even though the exact cuts differ slightly. You cut the top off your rootstock seedling, then make a matching wedge-shaped cut on the base of your scion so the two cambium layers, which is the thin living tissue just beneath the bark responsible for growth, can be lined up and pressed firmly against each other. Once aligned, the graft union is wrapped tightly with grafting tape or a similar material to hold everything in place and keep moisture out while the two pieces fuse together. This healing process typically takes several weeks, during which the graft should be kept in a warm, humid, sheltered environment, away from direct, harsh sunlight and strong wind that could dislodge the union before it has fully healed. Once you see new growth emerging from the scion itself, rather than from the rootstock below the graft line, you know the graft has successfully taken. And from that point forward, every single fruit that tree ever produces will carry the genetics of whatever variety your scion came from. If all of this sounds like more precision work than you are interested in taking on yourself, there is nothing wrong with simply buying an already grafted avocado tree from a reputable nursery instead. The advantage of understanding the process, even if you never do it yourself, is that you now know exactly what you are paying for and why a grafted tree costs more than a bag of pits but delivers a completely different outcome. You are paying for years of your life back, and for a guarantee of fruit quality that a seed-grown tree simply cannot offer. Now let us talk about what your tree actually needs once it is growing, whether you grafted it yourself or purchased it already grafted, because getting a good tree and then mismanaging its care is just as capable of ruining your harvest as skipping the grafting step entirely. Avocado trees are subtropical plants at heart, and they want warm days, mild nights, and protection from temperature extremes on both ends. The comfortable range most avocado varieties thrive in sits somewhere between 50 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and young trees in particular are extremely sensitive to cold, often suffering serious damage anywhere below freezing. If you live somewhere with occasional frost, plan on protecting young trees during cold snaps with frost cloth, or growing them in a container you can move indoors or into a garage during the coldest stretches of winter, until the tree matures enough to handle brief cold exposure without major damage. Sunlight is non-negotiable for this tree. Avocados need a minimum of 6 hours of direct sunlight every single day to flower and fruit properly. And if you are growing indoors or in a climate that requires bringing the tree inside for part of the year, position it in your sunniest south-facing window, and seriously consider supplementing with a grow light during the darker months, because a tree that survives on filtered or partial light will grow leaves just fine, while producing few or no flowers at all. Watering an avocado tree is a balancing act that trips up more people than almost anything else on this list, because the mistakes in both directions look nearly identical from the outside. Avocado roots are surprisingly shallow and sensitive to constant saturation, and overwatering is one of the single most common ways homegrowers accidentally kill a tree that was otherwise perfectly healthy, through a fungal problem called root rot that causes wilting and yellowing leaves that look almost exactly like the symptoms of underwatering, which confuses people into watering even more and making the problem drastically worse. The safest approach is to let the top few inches of soil dry out before you water again, checking with a simple finger test rather than watering on a fixed calendar schedule regardless of conditions. When you do water, water deeply and thoroughly, then allow proper drainage, since standing water pooling around the roots for extended periods is almost guaranteed to eventually cause serious problems. Soil matters just as much as water, because even a perfectly timed watering schedule cannot compensate for a container or planting site that does not drain properly. Avocados want loose, well-draining, slightly acidic soil, and if you are growing in a container using a cactus or citrus blend potting mix, or amending regular potting soil with extra perlite or coarse sand, dramatically reduces the risk of water pooling around the roots. If you are planting directly in the ground and your native soil is heavy clay, consider a raised bed or heavily amended planting hole instead of fighting against soil that naturally holds too much water. Now let us talk about pollination, because this is the single most misunderstood part of growing avocados, and it directly determines whether all that careful grafting and care actually turns into fruit on your plate. Avocado flowers have a strange, almost theatrical 2-day cycle. Every single flower on the tree contains both male and female reproductive parts, but they do not function simultaneously. Type of varieties open as female in the morning of the first day, close, then reopen as functionally male the following afternoon. Type B varieties do the exact opposite, opening as male in the morning and becoming female the next afternoon. This staggered timing exists in nature to encourage cross-pollination between different trees rather than a single tree fertilizing itself. And while many avocado varieties are technically capable of self-pollinating if the timing happens to line up, your fruit yield improves dramatically when you have both a type A and a type B variety growing near each other, since their opposite timing overlaps perfectly and gives bees and other pollinators far more opportunities to move pollen between compatible flowers. A classic, well-proven pairing many growers rely on is a Hass tree, which is type A, planted alongside a Fuerte tree, which is type B. If you only have space or interest in a single tree, do not panic, since many varieties will still produce fruit on their own through the small overlap window in their flowering cycle. But if you are serious about maximizing your harvest, planting one of each type is the single highest leverage decision you can make, beyond the grafting itself. Pruning is a lighter touch conversation with avocados compared to many other fruit trees, because avocados are somewhat sensitive to heavy pruning, and generally prefer restraint over aggressive cutting. Light pruning in late winter or very early spring before new growth kicks in should focus on removing dead or damaged wood, clearing out branches that cross and rub against each other, and opening up the interior canopy just enough that sunlight and air can reach the center of the tree, rather than only the outer edges. This modest opening of the canopy helps prevent the humid, stagnant conditions that fungal diseases like anthracnose thrive in, while also encouraging the tree to direct its energy toward fruit production on well-positioned branches, rather than excessive, shaded interior growth that rarely produces well anyway. Fertilizing an avocado tree does not need to be complicated, but consistency matters more than intensity. During the active growing season, feeding every 3 to 4 months with a fertilizer formulated for citrus and avocado trees gives the tree steady access to the nutrients it needs to support both healthy foliage and fruit development. Resist the urge to over-fertilize in hopes of speeding things up, since excessive fertilizer, particularly excess nitrogen, can push the tree toward lush, leafy growth at the expense of flowering and fruit, echoing a pattern that shows up again and again across almost every fruiting tree. Mulching ties several of these care elements together in one simple step. A thick layer of mulch spread around the base of the tree, kept a few inches back from direct contact with the trunk, helps regulate soil temperature, retains moisture so your watering schedule goes further, and slowly breaks down to contribute a gentle trickle of organic nutrients back into the soil over time. It is worth spending a moment on the pests and diseases most likely to threaten an otherwise healthy, well-grafted avocado tree, because catching problems early is far easier than reversing damage after the fact. Thrips, whiteflies, scale insects, and certain caterpillars are among the most common pests avocado growers encounter, and most can be managed effectively with neem oil or insecticidal soap applied at the first sign of infestation rather than waiting until the problem has spread significantly. Caused by a soil-borne fungal pathogen that thrives in consistently soggy, poorly draining conditions, remains one of the most serious threats to avocado trees of any age, and prevention through proper drainage and disciplined watering is far more effective than trying to treat an already infected root system. Anthracnose, a fungal disease that tends to flourish during wet, humid conditions, shows up as dark, sunken lesions on leaves, stems, and sometimes the fruit itself, and is best kept at bay through the same good airflow and canopy spacing that pruning provides. Harvesting avocados involves one small quirk that surprises almost everyone the first time they experience it. Unlike many fruits that ripen fully while still attached to the tree, avocados need to be harvested while still hard and green, then allowed to ripen afterward off the tree, usually over the course of about 1 to 2 weeks at room temperature. If you leave an avocado hanging on the branch, waiting for it to visually soften the way you might with a peach or a tomato, you will typically be waiting far longer than necessary, since many varieties can hang on the tree for weeks or even months in a mature but unripe state without dropping or showing obvious visual changes. Once you harvest a piece of fruit, you can speed up the ripening process by placing it in a paper bag, optionally alongside a banana or apple, since these fruits release ethylene gas that accelerates ripening in nearby produce. If you are working with limited space, whether that is a small yard, a patio, or purely container growing on a balcony, know that grafted avocado trees, especially dwarf varieties bred specifically for smaller stature, can absolutely thrive and fruit in containers as long as you provide adequate pot size, consistent repotting as the tree grows, and disciplined attention to drainage. A full-sized outdoor avocado tree can eventually reach 60 feet given decades of unrestricted growth, but a tree kept in a container and pruned attentively rarely exceeds 10 feet, making it entirely manageable for growers without a sprawling backyard orchard. Before you close this video, listen carefully, because this is the part people regret ignoring the most. Do not wait 5 years only to realize you planted the wrong variety, grafted it wrong, or wasted an entire season of growing time you can never get back. The fix takes 30 seconds. Grab your phone right now, scan the QR code on your screen, and get the complete guide today before you forget. Before we wrap up, it is worth talking briefly about choosing the right variety for your specific climate, because picking a mismatched variety is one of the quieter ways people sabotage an otherwise perfectly grafted tree. If you live somewhere with real winter cold, even occasional dips into the 20s, a variety like Mexicola Grande is considerably more cold-hardy than many of the more famous varieties, and can survive conditions that would seriously damage or kill a standard Hass tree. If water conservation matters in your climate, particularly in drought-prone regions, reed is often highlighted as a more water-efficient option compared to some of the thirstier varieties on the market. If you are working with a small yard or exclusively growing in containers, Gwen is a naturally smaller, more compact tree that was specifically bred with limited space in mind, making it far easier to manage than a variety that wants to eventually sprawl into a 60-foot giant. Matching your variety to your actual climate and space, rather than simply grafting whatever scion happens to be available, sets you up for a much smoother, lower-stress growing experience over the following years. There is also a second propagation method worth knowing about, called air layering, which some growers prefer over traditional grafting because it skips the need for a separate rootstock seedling entirely. Air layering involves selecting a healthy branch on an already mature, fruit-bearing avocado tree, wounding a small section of the bark to expose the cambium layer, then wrapping that wounded section in moist sphagnum moss and covering it tightly with plastic to hold in humidity. Over several weeks to a few months, the wounded section develops its own independent root system while still attached to and receiving nutrients from the parent tree. Once a healthy cluster of roots has formed inside that wrapped section, you simply cut the branch free below the new roots and plant it as a fully independent tree, one that already carries the exact fruiting genetics of the parent it came from, without ever needing to graft it onto separate rootstock at all. This method takes patience and works best on trees you already have direct access to, but it is a valuable alternative if you would rather avoid the precision cutting and alignment that traditional grafting requires. It is not about luck, and it is not about some secret trick that only professional growers know and refuse to share. It is about understanding that the tree you plant and the fruit it eventually produces are two separate genetic stories, connected only through the graft point, where a proven, reliable scion takes over from an anonymous, unpredictable seedling. Once that graft succeeds, you are no longer gambling on genetics at all. You are simply providing consistent sunlight, careful watering, proper drainage, thoughtful pruning, and patience, while a tree with already proven genetics does exactly what it was always capable of doing. That is the entire difference between waiting 15 years for a tree that might never fruit and enjoying a steady, reliable harvest of real, familiar, delicious avocados for the next 3 or 4 decades, all starting from a single pit that most people would have simply thrown in the trash without a second thought. If this video helped you understand what your avocado tree actually needs to succeed, there is a lot more like this coming, because most of what actually works in growing your own food is patient, practical, and rarely as complicated as the internet makes it sound. Make sure you are subscribed so you catch the next one, and if you decide to try grafting your own rootstock this season, take it slow and be patient with the healing process, because that patience is exactly what separates a tree that fruits for decades from one that never gets the chance. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.